G'day ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the channel. I'm of course the Calphalos, and today we're going to be taking a look at the Path of Champions in Legends of Runeterra. We are going to be doing something a little bit different today. That's quite simply because I will be giving you my guide on how to use Misfortune here in the POC in regards to Aurelion Sol. So this is something new that I'm trying out here on the channel, quite frankly because I am pressed for time rather recently. I have been shuffling work as well as content creating, which is not a big deal, but essentially I am lacking a little bit on the content making front. So instead of skipping a day or two, I'd like to do something a little bit easier and essentially share my thoughts on how to use these champions here in the POC. So this series will be kept short, simple, precise as well as concise. I would get straight to the point, and essentially I would not try to drag this out and make a long-winded episode, but I will try to go over things as slowly as I can, so that way I could help some of you newer guys out there as well as perhaps seasoned veterans who are probably familiar with the game. So one thing to note before we get into it is that take everything I say here with a grain of salt. The way I look at it, there's really no set in stone tutorial here for the POC. I think everything's a little bit random because of the way we get powers and whatnot. So obviously there's only so much that we can talk about without accounting for every single permutation or combination or possibility here in the POC. Now even though this guide is going to focus mainly around the Aurelion Sol, you can of course use some of these things that I say here into your regular adventures, although these are probably going to work better with the A-Sol itself. On a final note, it's also probably best to view this more as a guideline or suggestion or proposal instead of a tutorial on how to play this specific champion. Now with all that out of the way, let's go ahead and talk about Misfortune. So I'm going to be covering Misfortune first, mainly because she was the first champion that I attempted the Aurelion Sol run with here on the channel. You might have caught that video, and essentially I am going to talk about how I used that Misfortune in that specific video as well as how I'd use her again. So in terms of the Misfortune here, she is an aggressive champion with an easy difficulty, and that is precisely why I not only recommend Misfortune for beginner players but also for people who would like to bring her into the A-Sol to get the Bilgewater completion. She is quite simply easy to use, and basically there should be no headaches using this champion because you don't have to worry about combinations or combos and the like. All you need to do is you just need to keep attacking every round if you can attack, of course. So because Misfortune is a fairly weak champion in comparison to her other Bilgewater counterparts like the Tahm Kench or the Alawi, it will probably be worth to close out the game early and not drag out the game too long. So bearing that fact in mind, when you are attempting the Aurelion Sol run, try to take on champions that are going to be coming onto the board later. So champions like the Sejuani as well as Nolus. Those champions are just examples of what I would go for if I'm running the Misfortune. So essentially, if you are attempting the Aurelion Sol path, try to go for champions that are going to come onto the board rather later, and essentially you are going to be able to take advantage of Misfortune's early game power spike. That way you are able to close out the game before it even starts. Alright, so let's go ahead and talk about the star powers here real quickly. So nothing but Powder Monkey's 2 round start summon a Powder Monkey, and Most Wanted +1 stun mana when allies attack draw a unit. The first iteration nothing but Powder Monkey's 1 here will also summon a Powder Monkey, but instead of every round start, it will be summoned upon every time you get the attack token. So first of all, you might notice that none of these powers really synergize well with the Misfortune. Misfortune needs to see you attack 4 times to level up, and essentially none of these really promote attack aside from the Most Wanted, even though it's rather vague. But let me just get through each of them slowly and explain my reasoning for why I like the Misfortune. So summon a Powder Monkey here, in my opinion, is fairly decent because you get a Powder Monkey every round. If you have the second iteration, of course, you get a Powder Monkey every round, which is ephemeral, which means it will die upon that same round, and once it dies, you trigger the last breath and you get to deal 1 to the enemy Nexus. So of course with the nothing but Powder Monkey's 1, you're only going to get a Powder Monkey upon every attack token, which is still fairly useful but obviously not as fast or aggressive as the second iteration of the power. And in terms of the Most Wanted here, when allies attack draw a unit, is fairly decent because if you pair this up with a higher education which will get a +1/+0 on all attacking units whenever you draw a card, this could actually be fairly beneficial, which means it will contribute towards more damage onto those units that are attacking. So obviously, as you can see, these powers aren't too great for longer battles, so essentially this stems back to what I mentioned earlier, where you need to close out a battle quickly as well as end it fast in order to avoid too much damage being taken or potentially losing the game itself. Misfortune works really aggressively, so that is definitely how you should try to play her into the Aurelion Sol in order to maximize your chances of winning as well as getting the most damage possible. And speaking of most damage possible, Powder Monkey is probably one of your key units here, mainly because that will deal 1 chip damage every single round, so that could be fairly beneficial when you come down to the wire, essentially where you need 1 or 2 extra damage to close out the game, but it's also fairly useful as a chump blocking unit in case you are lacking something to block the enemy attackers. Alright, so we're gonna move on to the relics here. I am gonna be skipping the starting deck quite simply because there are quite a couple of cards to cover, and at the same time it's all down to creativity, at least from the way I look at it. You can have the best cards, but you need to be creative with the way you play in order to maximize the value of those cards. So there's obviously going to be lots of different combinations or permutations. I will probably just skim through over them when I'm done, but let's go ahead with the relics first. So Luden's Tempest, Krongan Inheritance, as well as the Tempest Blade. All your spells and skills deal 1 extra damage when I level up Rally, and Tempest Blade when I level up Stun all enemies. So this is probably my favorite build to run on the Misfortune, not just to ASOL but in general, quite frankly, because all of these relics are really easy to obtain first of all, and at the same time they benefit and synergize with Misfortune really well. So Misfortune will take advantage of the Luden's Tempest here really nicely, quite frankly, because Misfortune here will be able to deal 1 because of her bullet time and love tap, and couple that with the Luden's Tempest, that damage from 1 will go up to a 2, and that's gonna mean that you are able to kill off your enemies more easily. In Kronga Inheritance here, when I level up Rally is also nice to have. The reason for that being Misfortune needs to be on the board to level up, because the level up condition requires her to see you attack 4 times, which obviously means she needs to be on the board, and because she is on the board, she's going to be able to trigger Kronga Inheritance, and when she does trigger Kronga Inheritance, you get an extra Rally and you're able to attack. This is why I fancy the Tempest Blade as well, quite simply because the function is really similar to the Kronga Inheritance. Upon level up, Misfortune will stun all enemies, and because you combine that with the Rally, you are able to attack a open Nexus. So these 3 relics are really important for the Aurelion Soul, and the reason for that is quite simply because the Aurelion Soul will have a lot of beefy units. Misfortune itself is a fairly weak unit in terms of her health, therefore getting the stun to stun everyone and then proceeding to rally in order to attack a open Nexus is going to be extremely important if you're going to run her into the Aurelion Soul. The catch here, however, is that you need to find a way to quickly level her up, and the solution to that is to probably use this particular card here from the starting deck, which is the Island Navigator. The Scout is obviously very useful since you are able to attack twice, and because you are able to attack twice, you should be able to level up Misfortune even faster. However, she does come on at a 4 cost, so you can of course look at cost reduction to bring her on even earlier, but she should be fine, and couple that with a stat line of a 4/6, she should be able to not only deal damage on the attack, but also block some damage upon a defensive turn. Other units that could be decent here to progress Misfortune's level up quickly could also be the Slippery Wave Rider, quite simply because it has the elusive, so definitely you are going to be able to attack as well as guarantee damage onto the Nexus, but this is probably not that important in comparison with the Island Navigator here. But coming back to the relics itself, this is definitely the build to go when you're attempting the ASOL run. This provides you a good amount of control as well as a decent amount of aggression as well as Nexus damage. But one thing to note here, which is fairly unfortunate, is that the Luden's Tempest will not work with the Powder Monkey here. The Powder Monkey will still deal 1 to the Nexus because this is a trigger upon the unit dying. This is a unit and this is definitely not a spell. The Luden's Tempest only covers 1 extra damage for spells and skills, not units. But with all that being said, I would like to also present you with a couple of different builds that I seem to like here on the Misfortune and should function pretty well against the Aurelion Soul. So first of all, the Luden's Tempest, Inheritance, and the Tempest Blade are really easy relics to get. I will show you where I get these relics later on, but essentially you should have no problem getting any of these. So assuming that you don't have any of these 3 relics here, I will swap them out and give you basically an alternative build that which you can consider. So if I don't have any of those 3 relics, I would probably go with a Corrupted Star Fragment, a Ringblade Shadeleaf if I could drag it here of course, as well as a, if I scroll down, the Lauren Plate Rack. So the reason why I recommend this alternative build is quite frankly because you can take advantage of the CSF as well as the Shadeleaf. Now if you recall, like I mentioned earlier, there will be a Powder Monkey being summoned every round, or at the very least every attack token if you only have the first iteration of the power. So basically, because there is going to be a Powder Monkey every round, the Powder Monkey is ephemeral, which means it's going to die regardless. What you can do is, if you're attacking, you can of course have Misfortune support the Powder Monkey in question, and then with the Corrupted Star Fragment, she will kill that Powder Monkey as well as trigger the Last Breath effect, but transfer the stats as well as the elusive onto the Misfortune itself. This is another really good way to play the Misfortune because you are going to be granting her elusive, and with that elusive you are going to be guaranteeing Nexus damage. You can of course do this an infinite amount of times, which obviously means you can have Misfortune keep building stats by killing the Powder Monkeys that she summons. One thing important to note for new players out there is to make sure that you have the Greenglade Shadeleaf above the Corrupted Star Fragment if you want this to work. The way the POC works in terms of relics and items is that the topmost item triggers first, followed by the second as well as the third, and so on and so forth. So basically you want the Shadeleaf on top in order to grant the supported ally elusive, and once that supported ally has the elusive, the Corrupted Star Fragment will kick in, kill that supported ally, and transfer the keywords and stats over to Misfortune. Now in terms of the Lauren Blade Rack here with allies have Challenger, this is a fairly decent as well as a fairly generic relic in terms of the rare relics of course, mainly because there is already a power that's doing its job, which is the duelist if I'm not mistaken. Essentially, LSF Challenger will give everybody on your board Challenger upon summoning the champion, and basically fashion out better chances of attacking by dragging the units to your intended blocker. So one way to play this build essentially would be to have Misfortune support one of the Powder Monkeys here, and have the Powder Monkey drag a specific unit to block it. That way you are going to be able to deprive your opponent of one unit to block, therefore you are going to be able to deal more damage that way, because it could potentially free up your unit to attack. Alternatively, you can of course swap out the Laurent Blade Rack for a Troll King's Crown. So the Troll King's Crown is also a really decent relic because it will give every single ally overwhelm. It's also a fairly generic relic because there already is a power that will do the same thing. That power in question is of course Crush. So this is also fairly decent, quite frankly, because you are going to be able to deal excess damage to the Nexus. Now assuming the AI blocks a unit that you're attacking with, if Misfortune is able to kill that unit with her skill, that unit that has been blocked will still be able to attack because it has the overwhelm. Therefore, both the Troll King's Crown as well as the Laurent Blade Racks are also viable options to use here on the Misfortune. However, in a different scenario where you do not have Misfortune at level 30 and you only have her at level 20, and level 20 is the magic number as well if you want to take on the Aurelion Sol in my opinion, because you are able to get a guaranteed champion every game start by the Hero's Welcome over here. But assuming of course you have the Misfortune only at level 20, you don't have access to a third rare relic slot here. So assuming that you don't have Misfortune at level 30 and only at level 20, you are gonna have only access to 2 rare relics here. You can of course just get rid of this Troll King's Crown. The core relics, which are the Greenglade Shadeleaf and the CSF, will still function just as well. You are only missing out on maybe a Challenger or potentially the extra Overwhelm. Likewise, if you are running the Luden's Tempest and the Inheritance as well as the Tempest Blade build here, I would recommend getting rid of the Tempest if you cannot have access to a third rare relic slot, because essentially the rally and the stun is probably going to be more important than getting that 1 extra damage from all of your skills. But say for example you are at level 25, which is yet another possible combination here. At level 25 you should have access to a third common relic slot here. So say for example if you are at level 25, you can potentially get rid of 1 relic and replace it with either one of these options. I personally like to run against Rageblade. This is probably a relic that I would run on a level 1 Misfortune if I am just starting out at this game. Attack grant me +1/+1 is nice to have since it incentivizes you to attack and still functions just as fine. You can also get rid of this and possibly use something else instead. A Grand Duelist Blade will also give you a Challenger, or even a Troll King's Crusher will give you Overwhelm, but unfortunately this is only for the specific champion and not the entire board. Another alternative as well is to use a Storm Razor. Quick Attack is not a bad relic to have. Quick Attack is really nice on Misfortune since she will be able to attack without fear of getting killed herself. However, it is a bit of a waste in my opinion because you should be able to get a keyword from the champion item chest as well as champion rewards after beating any boss in the path. Hey guys, it's Future Calphalos here. So I forgot to mention where I got some of the relics in the video, so basically I just want to take this opportunity to do so. So yeah, kicking things off with the Steel Tempest, which I mentioned earlier. I get this from the Misfortune Chapter 2 campaign actually, so it's down here once you've beaten the Yasuo campaign, the Misfortune campaign that features Yasuo as the final boss. One thing to note as well for those of you who are new, some of these champions, they have their own specific story mode campaigns. In order to know so, all you need to do is you need to go ahead and check this adventure journal here. If that specific champion has a story mode campaign, it should be at the tip top here in the banner. There should be a 2-star or 1-star campaign. To get the relics, you have to beat the 2-star campaign. So basically I just wanted to say that, and the Steel Tempest is obtained from completing Misfortune's Chapter 2 against Yasuo here. Now as for the Kronga Inheritance, we need to use Darius for that one. That campaign is going to remain in Ionia, where we are going to have to take on his Chapter 2 campaign against the Karma. So once you beat the Karma, you should be able to unlock that relic. Now as for the Luden's Tempest, I believe that is obtained by completing Lux's chapter. So you need to play as Lux and basically beat the Ezreal campaign here in the Piltover and Zon map. You need to beat Mage's Burdens 2 in order to unlock the Luden's Tempest. And if you recall, I remember I mentioned getting the Greenglade Shadeleaf, and the Greenglade Shadeleaf is actually going to bring you back to Ionia. However, you're going to have to beat the Lulu campaign with the Annie here, and that's going to be the 2-star Lulu. Very confusing because both of these are really next close to each other. So basically it's the one that says Annie goes easy. You need to beat this one in order to get the that Greenglade Shadeleaf for the Annie. So yeah, these are where I got that for specific relics. In terms of the others, like the Troll King's Crown, the Laurent Blade Rack, and I believe the other one, which was the Corrupted Star Fragment, all those are actually random drops from reliquaries, which are of course these little buggers over here. If I can go into the legend level, these little buggers over here, the reliquaries. So they are random drops, but the other 4 that I mentioned are guaranteed guaranteed drops from these campaigns, so you should be able to get those really easily. That's why I mentioned it's really hard not to get the 3 first relics that I stated earlier, or I showed you earlier. But anyway, that's all from me, and I hope you guys enjoyed this video. So if you did, consider leaving a like as well as subscribing to the channel. I really do appreciate that support, but most importantly, it's so that you don't miss future episodes or uploads of Legends of Runeterra or Path of Champions content just like this one. Do leave a comment as well, because this is a new series that we're trying out here. So obviously it's still very unpolished, still in the beginner stages, so definitely give me your feedback on what you need me to talk about or what you need me to cover. So yeah, I will get on that in the next one. So basically do all that. Thank you all so much for watching. Thanks for joining me as well. Hopefully I catch you guys in the next one. Goodbye.